Now, I'm going to be speaking a little bit later on, and this is one of the passages that I'll be referring to. So we're going to put up John chapter 12, verses 23 to 26 on the big screen now. If you've got your Bibles, feel free to follow along. So that's John chapter 12, verses 23 to 26. Some both inspiring and challenging words of Jesus. So Jesus, talking to his disciples, replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honour the one who serves me." So this morning's talk is going to be a little different. Through a variety of circumstances, I had to put something together at the last minute, given that our scheduled speaker came down sick during the week, didn't have a time to prepare. And then the backup speaker ended up being away. So one way that you could look at this is that I'm like option C or 3, but I guess it was meant to be. But between that and the fact that this really had to be like a one-off, a standalone a standalone topic, this won't be a typical kind of sermon because that brought on like a bit of a time crunch. So hopefully next week, just so you know, we're going to be back to regular programming, and we'll be back picking up our series on the Gospel of Mark. Anyway, the time crunch has led with me going with something that I'd already done a fair bit of thinking about, praying about, talking to other people about, and reading about. And it's a topic that is hopefully useful for everyone here, regardless of age, regardless of stage, and also regardless of religious belief. And it's either going to be directly and acutely relevant to you or someone who you know, love, and care about. So here it is, today's sermon topic, perhaps the most bland sounding, uninspired and vanilla sounding subject, but you just wait. Here it is. How to provide pastoral care for those in midlife. I know, I had you at pastoral care, and midlife is just the icing on the cake. But here's why I think this is really important. Midlife, at least how I see it based on a bunch of the stuff that I've read, is really that period of life from between the ages of 41 through to 65. 41 to 65. And many of you in the room are there with me, I know. Yeah, we'll get to that. It is, like, to be fair, it's self-identified, okay? So if you want to be midlife, then regardless of your chronological age, you can still identify as midlife, okay? Those under 41 will probably get there, given that the average Australian lifespan now, or life expectancy, is in the early 80s. That's average. So this will hopefully serve as some kind of useful prep for you when it comes to that almost inevitable season of life. Some of you are 66 and older, and the stuff, if you don't identify as being in midlife, the stuff that I cover may resonate with your experience, and hopefully it'll be of help to the people who you love and care about who are currently in this phase. Now, a big caveat to this talk is that I'm going to be dealing with generalities, patterns, averages, and typical experiences. So what I describe obviously won't be everyone's experience. But at the very least, I'm hoping that some of it will resonate with everyone. And the second caveat is that the stuff that I've read about church, spirituality, and this season of midlife is that it doesn't get talked about or discussed very often. And one of the reasons is that midlife tends to look very different from the outside than how it's felt on the inside. So older people, for example, can look at those in midlife and think that they're in the sweet spot. You've got decades left, you've got generally at least okay health, and you've got some accumulated wisdom. So just stop complaining, okay? Younger people staring down at things like career, committed relationships, parenting, and maybe home ownership can look at successful people in their midlives and be really impressed. It's like, you've already reached these recognised milestones. You're winning in life. So stop complaining. Whereas in midlife, it's not uncommon to feel flat, uninspired, listless, discontent, and maybe even to find yourself thinking, I've got stuff worth complaining about. And I know this because I both felt it personally, and I've talked to a fair few people now, mostly guys, admittedly, about it, and it's real. It's real. It's not a midlife crisis. Again, from what I've read, maybe 10% of the population experience something resembling, something that could be labelled as a proper midlife crisis. It's more like, to use a fancy but cool-sounding French word, ennui. It's midlife ennui, which means dissatisfaction, listlessness, and a lack of enthusiasm or excitement. And today, we're going to talk about it briefly. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what role Christian spirituality and the church can play in caring for people both within the church and outside the church who are in this season of life. This is a big topic, obviously. I don't have time to do anything but kind of skate the surface today. And I know that we should also be doing talks on pastoral care for those in both young adulthood as well as children, as well as in not so young adulthood too. Today, it just happens to be about midlife because that's the thing that I've read the most about. And I don't want this to, it just sounds so easy for this to be self-indulgent. Again, let me stress, this is not the norm. This is not a typical kind of sermon. This is something that I had to put together quickly, but I still think it's important. But it's not going to be a standard sermon in that regard. Also, I'll be around afterwards if you want to talk to me more about it, or even if you just want to, if you feel like just telling me to stop complaining, I'm up for that too, okay? So whatever you want to talk about afterwards. So what is midlife? Again, roughly, it's the age, or it takes place between the ages of 41 and 65. That's what most of the literature seems to suggest. But it's not something that comes with chronology, with our age, as much as a phase that is felt by the person currently experiencing it. And you tend to recognise it in the rear view mirror. So it'll kind of become more apparent that this is where you're at after you've been in it for a while. And for most of us, midlife can be summed up by one big dominant theme: big changes across all of life. So big changes across all of life. So nice and quick. There's the emotional changes. So plenty of research now seems to suggest across cultures and populations that there's this real thing called the happiness curve, the U-shaped happiness curve. And that is our subjective feelings of happiness, so me literally feeling the emotion of happiness, starts to decline once we're out of our teens and bottoms out at around 45 to 47. So it's actually harder for most of us, again, not all, for most of us to feel happy in our 40s than, say, our 30s, or let alone our 20s. The good news is it upswings in our early 50s and peaks again between 60 and 70. And again, this is a big, crass generalisation, but it's easy to feel happy early and late in life compared to the middle of it. Does that make sense? The happiness curve. So we change emotionally. We change physically. So again, changes kick in during midlife. Women will go through menopause. Men will be experiencing rapidly declining testosterone levels and watching themselves start to shed lean muscle mass, whilst finding it scarily easy to get that beer gut. And I'm still to run into the guy who likes this, but it's hard to keep at bay. So that's physical changes. We've got cognitive changes. So get this, pretty interesting. What they call our fluid intelligence, so not raw IQ, but our fluid intelligence, starts to drop off between our late 30s and early 50s. And this isn't just a theory. Our prefrontal cortex, which is largely responsible for our fluid intelligence, starts to go into decline. What's our fluid intelligence responsible for? Things like rapid analysis, things like creativity, things like recalling facts and multitasking, if you believe in that. Our capacity for that starts to rapidly drop off and decline. And you know this is true when some days you struggle to remember why you walked into the room that you currently find yourself in. So we experience cognitive changes. We experience relational changes in midlife. So midlife is often characterised as the time of the big squeeze. Now, you're likely, again, it's not a given, but you're likely to have ailing parents on one side and kids hitting their teens on the other. Both deserve time and attention. Throw in possible grandchildren and in-laws. Plus, there's a good chance that if you're still working, which you are, most of us between the ages of 41 and 65, you're going to be good at your job and your job will still be demanding things from you. So you've got the squeeze from above, below, and the side. You've only got so much time. So what goes? What do you let go of? I'm so proud of this slide. So proud of it. I was hoping some people would laugh and get it, so that's great. Thank you. You made my day. Thank you. Friends. Friends go. And unfortunately, it's often our oldest friends that we let go of because they're the ones that we often take most for granted. Like, they've been with me for decades now. What's another 5 or 10 years worth of neglect? They'll still be there when I come back around. Again, old friends are the hardest ones to replace. So they're the worst ones to let go of. So we go through relational changes. We also go through what you can term existential changes. And that's just, I guess, like a fancy way of saying there are these uncomfortable truths that are now almost impossible to ignore. One being our mortality. I'm getting older and I'm getting more and more aware of my inevitable death. And this is because you or someone who you know and love has had the serious health scare. There's that. There's also regret. By this stage of life, you've probably seriously committed to some life path. Chances are you won't be doing that again on the same scale because you literally don't have that much time left. So you become really well acquainted with the idea of opportunity costs and those sliding door moments. So I had that one opportunity in my late teens to run away and join the circus and become a professional trapezist. Instead, I finished law school. Oh man, what have I done? So you got regrets. You've also got, alongside that, this idea of the death of dreams. So we all carry around like this collection of things, right? Things that you hoped to do in your life, but now you've realised you never actually can. You're going to run the 4-minute mile now in your 40s? Probably not. You're going to write that great Australian novel? Sorry. You're going to become a professional influencer in your 40s? I doubt it. I doubt it. Now, you can easily make light of this, but it can feel like a series of little deaths. Or, almost more scarily, in your 40s and upwards, you actually find that you've achieved the things that you set out to do when you were younger. You reach those goals only to discover they were overrated and not worth the cost. Ian Fleming, the creator of the James Bond novels, he had desperately, as a younger man, wanted to prove himself to his wildly successful and much admired family. His father was a beloved war hero and friend of Winston Churchill, who was killed in the First World War. His older brother Peter was a scholar, war hero, adventurer, and author. Now, near the end of his relatively short life, after Fleming had found all this sudden fame through the slow build-up and then massive popularity of the Bond novels, in the wake of that massive success, he was asked by a friend what fame and success meant to him. And his reply, ashes, dear boy, ashes. That's what it all amounted to, ashes. So you've got these often confronting existential changes. And then you have spiritual changes. I don't think that we talk much about this in church circles. It almost feels a bit like a taboo, maybe again, because it can be confronting. But many people report going through spiritual upheavals in midlife, dark nights of the soul, unanswered prayers. The complexity of life runs up against often earlier black and white beliefs. Or it may just be the typical worries of life, the deceitfulness of wealth, choke out their faith. I'm certainly not suggesting that these moments, these often confrontational spiritual moments, are always a bad thing. I believe they can be marvellous moments of grace. And as we'll see, it often turns out to be fertile ground for a renewed, more robust spirituality. But it can be at least really disconcerting if you're right in the middle of it, if not shipwreck your faith entirely. So they're the changes. Again, all of life changes. And there are at least like 3 classic, not so useful ways that people often go, both Christian and non-Christian, in trying to often just ignore these challenges or cope with them. And one classic way of trying to push through is just work harder. So this is a slide from the classic movie, like pretty much just the best movie on the grind and soul-destroying nature of working life, called Glengarry Glen Ross. ABC, Always Be Closing, a fantastic film if you haven't seen it. Not that inspiring. But classically in midlife, guys, I think particularly double down on our work ethic in order to prove to ourselves and others that we've still got it. So we work the longer hours, we chase the elusive promotion, we deny the fact that chances are we no longer have the same amount of energy or fluid intelligence we once used to possess. There's that. There's the second path of chasing status. So perhaps we're not the workaholic. Perhaps we think that we're smarter than that. We know that career success just isn't worth the effort. So we seek things like cool experiences to boost our status. I'm older and wiser now, so instead of getting that promotion at work, instead of just buying that the more cliched expensive car, what I'll do, I'm going to start working my way through 1,001 places you must visit before you die. Or make sure that I've eaten at all the best restaurants in town. And please hear me, there's nothing wrong with these things. There's nothing wrong with going to cool places and eating at nice restaurants. It's the motives behind why we do that stuff. Why am I chasing high status experiences? Is it about, because this is the real risk, is it about trying to appear relevant in a largely youth-obsessed culture? I used to pride myself personally on having excellent musical taste when I was younger. I still remember, or maybe this isn't a feigned memory, I don't care, I'll still cherish it. Older people used to come to me and say, hey, mate, like, what are you listening to? And I could say, blah, 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 oh, that's so, like, that's so cool, whatever. And that was great. And then I watched the great TV series recently with Santa Louie. I really enjoyed this soundtrack so much. And I looked up a review of the TV series online and was reading about it. And the commentator literally said, and the soundtrack is really good. And I thought, yeah, I felt validated, we're on the same page. And then it was like, and the soundtrack is really good if you're into dad rock. Oh, gosh, man. Killing me. Just killing me. Trying to appear still relevant. Okay, so that's the second not so great response. The third response, and this is the more cliched response. Many of us have more money in midlife than when we were younger. So in order to repress and avoid those uncomfortable feelings of mortality, decay, regret, I can now reach for more expensive hedonistic distractions. Top shelf drink, drugs, extreme exercise, gambling, expensive toys, expensive supplements, maybe some cosmetic surgery, couldn't afford that in my late teens. Or you may, again, classically leave your current partner and trade up for someone younger or higher status. American Beauty, not a movie that a lot of people like to talk about anymore, because again, no one has that much sympathy for a guy, middle-aged, going through a midlife crisis, particularly if that guy happens to be portrayed by Kevin Spacey. But this really epitomised and just showed the lengths that people will go to help keep those pesky, intrusive thoughts about being halfway through life at bay. And again, it's just so easy to scoff at these responses, especially this last one. But it's probably worth viewing them, at least to some degree, as someone going through a spiritual crisis. Someone being confronted with the fact that things are changing and the old way of being can't be sustained. But at the same time, many of us feel like we have no roadmap to go from here to there, wherever there is. And that can be immensely scary. So that's the disconcerting part of this talk done. Now for the generally good news, some pastoral responses to those in midlife. The first is relationships and connection. So some of you guys will be familiar with the now relatively famous Harvard study of, I think, generations or something like that. It's the now longest running sociological study. It's been going for 84 years. And the current director and associate director of the Harvard study argued, and this is after they literally chart people from often childhood all the way through to adulthood to death, and then they'll also start charting their children, and now in some cases their grandchildren. So they check in with them every couple of years, ask them a bunch of questions, so you can actually see how lives unfold. And they argue, based on their 84 years of research, the single most important principle for living, get this, a long and happy life, is good relationships. Perhaps even more incredibly, the respondents who reported being most satisfied with their relationships at age 50, so midlife, were also the most healthy, both mentally and physically, at age 80. Relationships really, 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 really matter for our health. But also they matter for our integrity. By midlife, one of the delusions we can let die is that we're capable of fully and accurately knowing ourselves, that we're free from self-deception. By midlife, you can't fool yourself about how easy it is to fool yourself. So one of the tasks of midlife is ensuring that there is at least one person in our life who really sees us, someone we've granted an all-access backstage pass to. But like I've said, time for that kind of relationships, particularly if they involve old friends, is one of the first casualties of the classic midlife time squeeze. So the kind of pastoral care that we should and can provide as a church, both collectively and as individuals, is making opportunities for people to form those kind of relationships and do what we can to free up people's time for that to happen. It has to go beyond Sunday mornings, as they will not suffice. And really importantly, this is a type of pastoral care, I'd argue, that we as a church can also offer to those outside our ranks. And this is particularly important for men who, again, talking in generalities, who generally struggle to form and maintain close friends in midlife, at least more so than women typically. So this is where things like COT, the Channel Odd Jobs team, are really important, where our women's Bible study group, Bob, our men's group, the upcoming family banquet, all these like little opportunities are fantastic to both maintain or initiate close relationships. So pastoral care for midlife means fostering quality relationships. And again, at this stage in life, unfortunately, that kind of thing is going to need to be scheduled, planned, prioritised. I can't rely on just spontaneously or at the very last minute calling out my mates and saying, hey, do you want to go out for a coffee or whatever? I'm busy, they're busy. I've got to start prioritising, planning and scheduling that stuff. That's the first response. The second response is getting involved in church, being part of a church, believe it or not. The famous psychoanalyst, Carl Jung, is reported to have said, of all those who consulted me in the second half of their lives, no one was ever cured who did not attain a spiritual outlook in life. So, if you haven't truly suffered before midlife, you will during it. And by suffering, and I'm pretty careful about this, my rough definition here, I mean having to undergo an intensely painful or challenging experience that you had very little, if any, control over and would have avoided if you could. So true suffering, the way I see it, is the kind that you can't control. It's not voluntary. And by midlife, if nothing else, you've lost people. You have lost people you didn't want to lose. And you lost them through a relationship going south, or you lost them through death or illness. But we've all lost at least someone close to us by the time we hit midlife. And that's a form of suffering. But both spiritual tradition and modern psychology suggest that suffering, believe it or not, can play a major role in human development and growth. However, and this is a big however, and really importantly, this, you could call it post-suffering stress-related growth, is not guaranteed and may lead to more brokenness as opposed to wholeness. So it may not kill you, but there's no guarantee it's going to make you stronger. It can make you even more broken. So you need to have coping methods, particularly in midlife, that can help make sense of that inevitable suffering, that, if you like, can integrate it into the larger story of your life. But get this is amazing. Religious coping methods have been found to offer the greatest chance for this kind of positive growth. Religious coping methods have been found to offer the greatest chance for this kind of positive growth. In other words, believe it or not, and hopefully most of you believe it, a healthy and positive spirituality is the best mechanism for integrating the suffering that is almost guaranteed to have hit you by midlife. There's a bunch of other really good coping mechanisms, but again, more and more research seems to be suggesting that there is something about spirituality that can help us integrate and cope with suffering better than any other means, which is amazing. So please hear me on this. Assuming that your spiritual community, your church, is healthy, and you either have good relationships or the potential for good relationships in them, then that is the best context to find yourself in when the inevitable suffering arrives on your doorstep. Pastoral Care 101 for those in midlife is, despite how busy you think you are, and regardless of how much subjective happiness you may not be feeling right now, and irrespective of the doubts and misgivings you have about God, assuming that your spiritual community is healthy, then press into it. And the crazy thing is, in my experience, is that when life gets hard and busy and people start having doubts about God, they actually walk out or move away from spiritual community instead of walking in. So, Pastoral Care 101, press into it. Of course, it's not a silver bullet. Of course, it's not going to fix everything. Nothing will, short of Jesus returning and ushering in the fulfilled kingdom of God. But in terms of what we have at our disposal, again, more and more research seems to suggest that it is spiritual coping mechanisms, and they are best going to be found in a healthy spiritual community. And really importantly, this pastoral care response is not just for those who consider themselves Christian. Some research suggests, and probably your experience, that those in midlife are actually open to religion. At this stage of life, midlife, you're probably more prone to reject a kind of simple and naive idealism of youth, and simplistic forms of religion will fall under that banner. But at the same time, you've suffered, and at the same time, you're open to the sacred and the transcendent. And also, there seems to be a growing bunch of evidence that actually suggests that religion is a strong contributor to overall happiness and health. Most people who are part of religious communities, again, most, not all, are less prone to alcohol and drug misuse. And being involved with a spiritual community usually means more frequent social contact, which again is great for people's health and well-being. And you also find yourself devoted to a cause that is bigger than you. And on top of all that, you're encouraged to enter into a relationship with the loving creator of the universe. Now, if you've been part of a church for a while, like me, this is all the stuff that I can just take for granted. I need to talk to my friends who aren't part of a church, haven't been part of a church, to see how they value what I take for granted, if that makes sense. And sometimes, particularly in midlife, they'll open up about that. We forget how amazing this is. And the last pastoral care response, desiring more, becoming more. Up until midlife, it's easy to be concerned with chasing typical happiness. Just again, like chasing typical happiness. Again, feelings that make us feel good. But as C.S. Lewis wrote, it's not that this desire for happiness and pleasure is too strong. The real problem is that it's too easily satisfied. So he wrote, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered to us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because they cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. We are far too easily pleased." In addition to this, you can understandably in the first part of life get caught up with the project of self. So working out my identity, my fulfillment, my accomplishments, my status and my security. I've got to find my place in the world. That's like, again, pre-midlife. That kind of attitude can also infiltrate our spirituality. So the questions that can so easily kick around your head, particularly maybe as a younger person or even someone starting off midlife, is, do I easily get along with the people at my church? Am I getting fed here? Are my spiritual gifts being recognised? What church best fits my needs? And again, these are all understandable, not innately bad, and maybe even necessary questions. But I think at midlife, you start to realise that they're not the end. There is more than feeling happy and building a life for yourself, even like building a spiritual community for yourself. So psychologists and sociologists have described midlife as a period when the challenge to be negotiated and overcome is achieving what they call generativity over stagnation. And again, by generativity, they just mean intentionally devoting our time, efforts and resources to causes and people beyond our own lives. You may have heard about this idea of a hero's journey. It's pretty popular. Well, Richard Rohr, the Franciscan monk and father, he describes midlife as a chance to discover that it's actually an expanded hero's journey. The journey was actually never about me and my fulfillment, but the gift that I return with for the larger community that God has placed me in. Do you get that? It was never actually about me and my fulfillment. It was all about me, again, getting this gift so I can take it back to the people that God has placed me amongst. That's the real purpose of the journey. And this will likely lead to something more than just mere pleasure or happiness or stroking our egos. It's got more to do with that deep-seated, long-lasting fulfillment, joy even, that comes from being intertwined in loving relationships and commitments to causes and people outside ourselves. So Jesus talks about life and life to the full. And the way to get there, to live that out, was loving God and loving people in a voluntary and self-sacrificial way. We used this term before of little deaths. Well, in a Christian context, these little deaths are a chance to practice dying before you die. Dying before you die. And we know, like we heard read before, that the path to true life comes through dying to self. Real growth comes from death, from surrendering and letting go, and sometimes having ripped away from us the kind of like the false self or the false purposes of life or the good things that we have mistakenly made the ultimate things. And in midlife and within a Christian context, this will probably look like a less self-focused form of faith. We're going to start being more concerned with where and to whom God is calling us to serve, rather than what He and they can give us. We won't be so rocked or thrown by suffering or the injustices of life, or if we feel overlooked or hurt, because A, this isn't our first rodeo, and anyway, it's not really about us. It's not really about us. And really interestingly, whilst I talked about fluid intelligence declining in midlife, what they call crystallized intelligence increases. People generally become more articulate in midlife. Their vocab continues to expand. It may take us longer than when we're younger, but we can make connections and articulate connections between different bits of knowledge and experience that we've gathered over the years. And we generally become more adept at interpreting that information and often more skilled in communicating it or teaching it even. So the difference between those two forms of intelligences, it's been described as raw knowledge in the first half of life versus wisdom in the second. So I think of the Apostle Paul mentoring Timothy or Mordecai guiding Esther. And that capacity only really comes on from midlife. Ultimately, we will want a relationship with God for God's sake. And we'll be happy if we've got any sense, by God's grace, to lose our prior, smaller conception of life in order to find the true life. We need to get beyond promoting and protecting ourselves. And the motive and the opportunity to move from a self-focused life to an others and God-focused life may never actually be greater than at midlife. So the big question that I want to leave you with, and this isn't an original question, this is a question that came up a lot in the books that I read, a question that most people, when they're interviewed, ask at midlife. Will my life have counted? Will my life have counted at the end of it? So in our context, will I be holding on to life? Will I be content to remain a single seed? Or will I be happy? Will I surrender and graciously let go in order to produce more and more seeds, yeah? Will I be stagnant and again just trying to keep my well-defined small life? Will I be generative and intentionally invest in the lives and the causes of others? Those words again that we read out at the start from the book of John, the words of Christ. My Father will honour the one who serves me. My Father will honour the one, the God of the universe, God the Father himself will honour you if you serve Jesus. And I started to think, man, like in terms of some kind of, criteria for working out if your life is actually counted or not, if God the Father honours you at the end of it, then it's counted for something. And the way to that, again, is to serve. Follow Jesus and serve. Go where he would go where he wants you to go, serve others, serve him, and that will lead to a life that counts. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for how you've designed us. We thank you that, again, you made humanity according to their kind. And I pray that we'll have the grace both to accept, I guess, those design patterns and also graciously lean on you and lean into you and each other when, because of sin or brokenness, whatever the cause is, when we feel that we're starting to perhaps decline, when we don't feel that we've got the capacities that we used to have when we were younger, or when we just kind of hit the wall and realise that a lot of the things that we hope to shed about ourselves that we don't like are going to be there in some form for the remainder of our lives, the thorns in our flesh. Father, help us, again, use these as opportunities to lean more into your grace. And help encourage us and help us be encouraged by the very reality that we indwelt by your Spirit. You haven't left us alone. You've given us brothers and sisters. And you haven't left us just to, I suppose, self-help slogans and general encouragement, but we have the power of God living within us, changing us, moulding us, capable of doing miraculous things. And I pray that that will be a constant source of joy and encouragement. Amen.